This is James Smetham.
Born in 1821 in Pateley Bridge, Yorkshire, Smetham was the son of a Methodist minister. Throughout his life, he was a devout Methodist, and from 1856 to his death in 1889, he was a committed member of his local Methodist community in Stoke Newington, North London.
Smetham was also an artist. He was an associate of the contemporary Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, and his visual art and poetry have a similarly romantic and mystical style. However, unlike his friends Dante Gabriel Rossetti and Ford Madox Brown, Smetham's work had limited commercial success, and he was financially dependent on portrait commissions and employment as art master at Westminster College, a training college for Methodist teachers.
Smetham also used his creative skills for personal endeavours. Most notably, between 1848 and the late 1870s, he made thousands of squares. Drawn in his diaries, around the edges of his Bible, and in the letters that he wrote to his friends and families, in these small squares, he made interpretations of his everyday life, intellectual concepts, and theological ideas.
Alongside these squares, in 1874, Smetham created an Orrery of Personal Responsibility in his daily journal. Inspired by mechanical orreries invented in the 1700s to demonstrate the movement of the planets in the solar system, Smetham's two-dimensional orrery placed himself at the centre, surrounded by 5 rings of personal relationships. Each ring recorded the initials of people he knew, arranged into different categories according to the sort of relationship he had with them. On the first ring closest to him, Smetham recorded his family, including his wife Sarah, their children John, Alfred, George, Edwin, Helen and Edith, and his siblings Richard, Mary, Phoebe Ann, Sarah, William and Elizabeth. The second ring recorded his friends, including his close friend William Davis, a 19th century artist, and the Pre-Raphaelite artists Dante Gabriel Rossetti and Frederick J. Shields. In the third ring, Smetham recorded friends of friends, including the Victorian art critic John Ruskin. Then on rings 4 and 5, he recorded his church relations. Here, Smetham did not write the initials of specific individuals, but made reference to whole groups of people, such as his Sunday scholars and Methodist classes he ran in his local area. Classes are a specifically Methodist form of small group. In the mid to late 1800s, they were used to encourage members in their faith and help them retain their spiritual discipline. We know that these class meetings and their members were very important for Smetham, because he described them in his diaries as having an incommunicable atmosphere that cast a spell over his body, mind, emotions, and spirit. Therefore, alongside his orrery diagram, Smetham also wrote long lists of the individuals from these categories, including the names of 95 people who had been part of his class meetings between 1860 and 1874. Finally, Smetham added an external gallery to his orrery. Here he made a tally of the approximately 1,300 students he had taught at Westminster College. Smetham's Orrery of Personal Responsibility is a fascinating example of one man's creative use of visual art to organise his lived experience of personal relationships.
Smetham did not leave an explicit explanation of why he made his Orrery of Personal Responsibility. Nevertheless, consideration of other things that he wrote in his letters and diaries and reflection on his Victorian context suggests 3 reasons why he may have made his Orrery of Personal Responsibility. Firstly, it's important to notice that Smetham placed himself at the centre of his orrery, where the sun would be located on an astronomical orrery. This is perhaps a reflection of James Smetham's understanding of the individual. From the 1840s onwards, the concept of individualism was widely used in Britain to celebrate the individual and their freedom. This informed political and economic policy, but also influenced how individuals understood themselves and their ability to help themselves to achieve and prosper. Within this context, Smetham's orrery can be understood as a visualization of how he understood himself as the most important person in determining the direction of his life. Related to this, because Smetham named his diagram the Orrery of Personal Responsibility, it could be that this diagram was his way of visually organising his relationships and the extent to which he, as a powerful individual, was responsible for and could influence people he engaged with. This approach to personal relationships was not only informed by mid-Victorian concepts of individualism, but also Methodist theology. Within the Methodist community Smetham was part of, it would have been common for leaders and preachers to emphasise the importance of doing as much good as possible to as many people as possible, whenever possible. We know from Smetham's written diaries and letters that he was keenly aware of this Methodist mantra. However, suffering from poor mental health throughout his life, he did not always find it easy to support the needs of others. Therefore, he may have made this orrery to help him identify where his relational energy was best placed and channel his limited personal resources into the people that he thought were most in need of his support.
In contrast to these interpretations, Smetham's Orrery of Personal Responsibility could also be read as a representation of the impact of other people on his life, rather than his impact on the lives of others.
Throughout his life, because of the limited financial success of his artistic creations and his poor mental health, Smetham was often physically, spiritually, and financially reliant on the support of his friends, family, and Methodist networks. For example, Smetham's Methodist network provided him with many portrait and broader artistic commissions. Smetham's Methodist network also provided opportunities for him to go on trips to the seaside and Lake District for the benefit of his health.
In 1872, Smetham wrote a letter to his friend John Frederick Hall, whom he included on the second ring of his orrery, saying, "There is an infinite sea and an endless shore, and that little dot is humanity among the numberless sands, the countless waves, and the diapason of eternity. That little dot on the shore is as small as a mathematical point, but such a point is the centre of a circle of power and beauty, whose lines of radiation go out to the ends of the earth and beyond it, never reaching the circumference." The circle of power and beauty could be a reference to Smetham's circle of support, which he then went on to represent visually in his orrery. This, and Smetham's regular reflections on the support he received from others in his diaries and letters, suggests that Smetham's orrery, which he made at a time when his mental health was once again beginning to deteriorate, could have been his way of celebrating his relationships and the contributions they made to his everyday life.
We will never be able to say with certainty exactly why Smetham made his Orrery of Personal Responsibility, and it is likely that he was trying to achieve many different things while making this diagram. However, whatever his motivations were, Smetham's orrery allowed him to reflect on the people that he knew and how he and they contributed to each other's lives.
Why don't you have a go at making an orrery? Perhaps an orrery of personal relationships. Who would it include? Who would be in your inner circle? Who would be in your external gallery? Are there people who are no longer part of your life whom you'd include? And are there ways you could visually indicate relationships that bring you joy or are particularly challenging?